Emerging on the frontiers of science, a pioneering breed of theoretical physicists and inspired inventors are challenging the way we think about harnessing the unseen forces of nature. Despite ridicule, lack of funding, and outright suppression, they are confronting an outmoded classical worldview and ushering in a monumental scientific revolution.
Most people would agree you can't get something for nothing. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And yet, we get our oxygen free from the air we breathe. We get sunlight free, and water, that used to be free until bottled drinking water came along. But what about energy? We've always had to pay for that, whether it's wood or coal, oil or electricity. It's always been the rule that you can never get back more energy than what you put in the first place. That's a fundamental law of nature. Physicists of the 19th century figured that out with the first law of thermodynamics, the conservation of energy. Maybe so. But science has come a long way since then. And laws, well, there's never been one that hasn't been broken.
Hi, I want to welcome you guys to Better World Technology. We're going to have fun here today. I built the world's most efficient heat pump and developed it. And these are the evaporators for that heat pump right here. They're 8 feet high, 3 feet wide. And if you notice here, there's 8 of them. They go all the way across here. Now, you could have them in this type of an angle that looks a lot like a solar system, but you could also just slap them up against the side of a building, or you could put them up on top of a roof. They don't have to be facing the sun. They can be facing east, west, south, wherever you want to go. You also, a lot of people have built them into fences, and they've also built them into carports and things. But if you notice here, all this is a very thin little piece of metal. It's just about 1/4 of an inch thick, even with the little veins in it. And we have a vein pattern on top of it. The main thing is that this is aluminum, highly conductive, and so there's no thickness to it really. That's just a plate. This is the thickness right here. And so there's no real thickness to it, but the thing that we've done here is we have created the coldest thing outside. By creating the coldest thing outside, when we take refrigerant, just like the stuff you got in your refrigerator, and we run it inside this panel. You notice up here at the top when we come in the nipple, this is all, the lines are in a straight line down, but there's like a little pattern at the very top, so that as the pressure builds up in any one place, the Freon can migrate to the other parts of the panel. So it now has a chance of sending the Freon down in any one of these channel lines, and then wherever you get pressure, Freon could then jump ship and go over to another line, and so it pretty much concentrates it down through the middle of the panel in a nice even pressure, thereby getting the Freon to cover all the areas of this. Now, the refrigerant we put in here boils at 40 degrees below zero, therefore, as long as the refrigerant that's inside this panel is colder than whatever the air is out here, or the phenomenon that's hitting this panel, then the heat from the air or the sun or the wind or the rain or the sleet or the snow will be transferred into the refrigerant on the other side, because it's the second law of thermodynamics. Hot goes to cold. So if this is the coldest thing outside, anything out there that touches it is going to give its heat to it. A little bit of heat goes a long way. That gas starts expanding like crazy, and as it expands, it then is drawn into the compressor, not through suction. I've got engineers and inventors that don't like to use the term suction, but through negative pressure. So as the compressor is creating this negative pressure, the gas is migrating to it. And so a compressor is a gas pump. It'll pump gas. And so the gas is being pumped by the compressor into the compressor, elevated in temperature. And even though if you touch this panel, it's ice cold to your hand, and if you touch the line going out of the panel, it's still ice cold to your hand. When it hits that compressor takes all the gas in this space, puts it in that space, elevates the pressure and the temperature. Going out of the compressor, do not touch that line whenever that thing is on, because it's 200 to 250 degrees hot. And so That's where we get the heat. All of the heat is transferred in here. We then use a compressor to take the relatively useless energy that we've got and elevate the temperature and pressure and make it very useful energy. Then that heat would be transferred later. One last point I want to make, and then we'll go inside, is that actually right here, when we were using R22 instead of R12, somebody suggested using that. We used to use it in the panels, but if the compressor wasn't calling for any heat, it wasn't migrating to Freon, the Freon would set out here, and if the sun came out or we got a big wind or anything, all of a sudden, man, the pressures built up out here. It was unbelievable, and the pressures got as high as 500 pounds per square inch. We were popping those nipples and popping the lines, and so we had to stop using R22 because when it wasn't on cycle, it was building up too much pressure. Now, one other thing I want to say is that the air over this surface area causes a convection to happen across the surface. If you've got a 2-mile-an-hour wind, you'll get more air molecules that dump their heat into this panel than you will in a 1-mile-an-hour wind. So the greater the wind is flowing, the more molecules that are going to be transferring their heat, and the heat transfer here happens instantaneously, faster than you can blink. So if a molecule hits there and it's hot, it all of a sudden will let go of its heat, and so if we can get it out of there and get a new one in there, that makes it even better. We'll hear more about that as we go up to the facility up here. Okay? All right, let's do it. I guess. Well, then you just take that hot gas and run it into a heat exchanger. And so a heat exchanger would be a tube that has a tube running through the middle of it. And you've got a hot tube where the gas comes out, maybe 200, 250 degrees, and then you've got that tube running through the middle of it that's got cold water in it. Remember, hot goes to cold, and so therefore if you got the hot gas and you got the cold water running through the middle of it, where's the heat from the gas going to go? Into the cold water, and pretty soon you're not going to have cold water, you're going to have hot water. Well, that's what you want with a solar system, isn't it? Hot water? Sure. So we said, an idea is born. So we had a collector, we have a water pump or a gas pump, in our case a gas pump. We're running the gas back down, and we're elevating the temperature of the gas, and so now we can, with hot gas, make hot water. So we said, wow, that sounds like a great idea. Now, the reason why it hit us as an idea was not because we were technical, not because we were engineers, because none of us were, but because we were salesmen. And we said, man, we went down and we spent days at the malls. This is in 1974, 75, 76. This is the era. And in those days, let me tell you something, the malls were filled with energy shows. We got this big energy crisis. The Arabs are holding America at gunpoint. This is tantamount to war. We've got to do something about this. We've got to conserve energy. And so now all of a sudden energy shows hit America. And so for a marketer, it was a marketer's dream. President of the United States declares war on energy. It was a marketer's dream. But we would go through the malls, and at 9 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock at night, what does a salesman do to demonstrate a solar system? What do you do in the middle of a mall at 7 o'clock at night to demonstrate a solar system? No sun. So you know what they would do? We used to call it the moose call. It was funny. You'd be in the mall, you're walking along, and all of a sudden you would hear, bang! And then you walk a little further and you hear, bang! And you'd say, somebody's demonstrating a solar system. Now, what could they do with a solar system? Well, there's no sun or anything, but they got the glass on top of their panels, and they would be banging the glass to prove to you that no matter how hard you hit that glass, you couldn't break the glass on their solar system. And that's why their solar system was the best. Can the other guy do this to the glass on his solar system? It's the only thing you could demonstrate. So you'd hear it, bam, the moose call through the thing. And we said, boy, this would be neat. Now, if we developed the solar heat pump would have the evaporator. You can throw rocks at it all day. You can't do anything to hurt that piece of metal. I mean, what are you going to do here? I mean, throw rocks at it, do anything. You're not going to hurt it. There's no glass, there's nothing. But we don't want to bang this. Instead, we were sitting here with this thing sitting in the middle of the mall. The temperature in the mall is what? 70 degrees? This takes heat out of 40 degrees below zero. So we just sit there and make hot water for them from the energy we're taking right out of the mall. And so we're not going bam, we're actually making hot water for them in the middle of the mall. So we're like, wow, this will be great. And if it works fairly good or as good as anything else does, we'll be happy. Surely we can make it work as good as everything else does. All these major corporations are in it. It must work. So that was the way the whole idea was born. Now, a couple of guys, sales guys, not a technical person in our midst, all of a sudden say, let's do it. Let's build this thing. So we went out, got somebody to design a panel like this, an evaporator, flat plate collector, and got a whole truckload of them. Bought a bunch of those. Now, we did not know how many of those things you're supposed to put for a house. We don't know. No idea. The refrigeration model that all engineers use is 1 ton of evaporator, 1 horsepower compressor, 1 ton of condenser. That means that if you can expand one full enough refrigerant that the heat from it would melt a block of ice that's 1 ton in size in 1 hour, that's the volume that it was set up to evaporate. So 1 ton of evaporator, and then if you had a 1 horsepower compressor, it would keep up with that in an hour. And then if you had a 1 ton condenser, enough condenser to be able to once again cool down or condense the amount of the volume of gas it would take to heat up a block of ice 1 ton in size, then you've got a refrigeration paradigm. This is it. This is the Bible. All refrigeration engineers go by this. All the experts say 1, 1, 1. That's the formula. But we didn't read the book. We didn't know the formula. Oh well, we don't know what we're doing. We're just going to put an evaporator up there. We don't know how big to build it. We'll just fill the whole roof with them. And then at least they'll be big enough that they'll work, because if it's too little, we won't know if it's working or not. So bigger is better. So we go down to a refrigeration supply house, and we come in, we say, we need a condenser. The guy there says, okay, what kind of condenser do you need? What size do you need? What are your operating pressures? How much vapor do you have? What is the temperature of the vapor as it's coming into the compressor? And starts cussing at us, saying all these crazy things to us. And I said, look, man, we got cash, we can afford it. You don't have to cuss at us, we'll just buy it. He says, oh, okay, well, what size do you need? And we said, what's the biggest one you got? Bigger is better. And he says, oh, the biggest one I got, well, I got a 6 ton sitting out there. I said, oh, that won't work. We'd have to have a forklift truck to pick it up. He said, no. That's the amount of refrigerant that it'll condense. Two of you guys can pick it up easy and throw it on the back end of that Bronco. Super, we'll take it. So we bought a 6 ton condenser. Now we got a 6 ton condenser. God only knows how much evaporator we got on top of that roof there. And we got a 2 horsepower compressor. Any engineer would have told us you're crazy. And so basically, it's a divine kind of madness. We went out and put it in, hooked it all up. Now, we got to have refrigerant. We also needed a TX valve, but I'm not going to get into that. And so we got to have a refrigerant. Okay, so we get the refrigerant for the compressor, and we get how much? We don't know. What's the biggest bottle you got? A 50-pound container. Fine, we'll take a 50-pound container. So we go back, we got 50 pounds of refrigerant. Normally the heat pump we had used 5 pounds of 4 or 5 pounds of refrigerant, but we got 50 pounds of refrigerant. We got this massive evaporator. We got this 2 horsepower compressor. We got this 6 ton condenser. And we don't know how to charge it. How much do we put in this thing? We don't know. So here was the formula. We'll just start dumping this stuff in here until it works. That was the formula. So here we are dumping refrigerant into this thing. We get to 49 pounds. We got 1 pound left in the bottle. We're praying, God, please, we don't even know you, but make it work. Amazing how many people pray to God that don't even know him, isn't it? And anyway, All of a sudden, this thing starts, and it's working. And finally the sun goes down, and it's nighttime, and the temperature goes to like 70, 75. Yes, yes, it's working. Yes, we're taking energy out of the air, and the sun is down. So we waited a while. It's working. Every one of us went out and grabbed every friend we had in the world. All three of them came back. And so now it's actually anybody can put their hand there and see it's hot water. It's getting warm. So all the people come back, they look, there's no sun, they're looking at this solar system outside, they're running inside of the house, they're seeing the hot water, they stay long enough for it to go up 5 degrees, they're like, you're taking solar energy right out of the air in the middle of the night, you're going to be rich, man, you people are going to be rich. We're like, yeah, it's kind of neat, huh? How'd you like to be part of that? Yeah, well, how do I get to be part of that? And so now, there's only one thing worse than an ignorant man who is broke, and that is an ignorant man with money. And so we all of a sudden got money. So we hire an engineer. Now we can afford one. We hire an engineer. The engineer comes in, and we say to the engineer, we say, okay, here it is. He looks. He doesn't know whether to cry or laugh. He doesn't know. He's looking at this thing going, you people are crazy. Was there anybody that knew what he was doing on this deal? Nobody. No, sorry, just a bunch of salesmen. So tell us, how do we go from here? We want to mass produce these things. He's like, whoa, wait a minute. So the first thing that engineer did was tell us that we can't be doing what we were doing. And so we fire the engineer. And then we go out to hire another engineer, and we say to the guy, look, before you even see this thing, you're a young man, do you need the job? You do, good. Because we don't want you to tell us that we can't do it. We want you to tell us why we are doing it. Not that we can't. We know we can. We're making the hot water. Why are we doing it? And so we went to work on that. And actually it took about a year, 2 years, almost 3 years, with all kinds of fights in our little group. And I finally wound up buying everybody out of the deal because I was the only one that sold it. Everybody talked about what it could or couldn't do, and they were embarrassed because they'd go to the engineer, and they would say, engineer, we're doing things that we can't do. The engineer would say, you can't do that. They would say, we're sorry, and they'd go home. I went to the customer. I said, hello, here's what we're doing. We are doing it. Would you like to be able to do that? Good. Here's how much it costs. Let's put one in. So I didn't go to the engineers. I went to the customers, and me and the customers made a lot of money. They saved a lot of money, and I made a lot of money doing what the engineers said we couldn't do. Well, now, why did the engineers say we couldn't do that? And to this very day, you can run into engineers that can tell you that we can't do this. Because they read the manual. The Copeland refrigeration manual is one of them that says, here is what a heat pump is and how it works. Now, ultimately we figured out the rules and the way to do it and why it was doing what it was doing, and guess who figured out what it was doing? I did. The least qualified human being in the world finally figured out what it was doing, because I had so many fights and arguments with so many engineers that I finally got educated enough to understand what they didn't understand. And so, in essence, here's why it was working. We designed deliberately, and to this day do, 2 to 3 tons of evaporator on one side, 1 horsepower of compressor in the middle, and 2 to 3 tons of condenser on the other side. And guess what? It puts out almost 3 times as much energy as the book says you can get out of a 1 horsepower compressor. You know why? Because you got almost 3 times the energy going in and out. Duh, you know, I mean, this really isn't that hard to understand. Now, so the book says you can get 12,000 BTUs out of 1 horsepower compression. Look at the book. Ask an engineer, how many BTUs in a horsepower? There's 12,000 BTUs in a horsepower. Why? Because there's 12,000 BTUs in 1 ton of fully expanded Freon. And so you can only put 1 ton of fully expanded Freon into a horsepower compression if you design it that way. But what happens if you put 3 tons of fully expanded Freon through that horsepower? And there's 12,000 BTUs in 1 ton. You could get 36,000 BTUs in a horsepower. Well, you couldn't if you didn't have a 3-ton condenser on the other side, because if you put all that in but you couldn't get it out, You'd only get one if you had a 1-ton condenser on the other side. You'd still only get 12,000 BTUs. You got a bottleneck there. And so if you don't bottleneck it anywhere, you put an oversized evaporator on and an oversized condenser on the other side, you get 2 or 3 times what the book says you can get. And here's how simple it is. We've proven it. We've proved it all across America. Oh, thousands and thousands of these units went in across America because I got good at selling them. You can tell me all day that I can't get 12,000 or 20,000 BTUs out of a horsepower or 30,000 BTUs out of a horsepower, but when I elevate a tank of water and I know there's 8.33 pounds in a gallon of water and a BTU is the amount of energy it takes to raise 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit, I can measure that. And when I know I'm getting 30,000 out of it, you can tell me I can't until the cows come home, pal. Just get out of my way because I'm going to keep doing it. And so it was that tenacity and my sales background that really got this whole thing launched and started. If I hadn't had that, the engineers would have won. We wouldn't have any of this stuff today. And the book, which still says 12,000 BTUs per horsepower, even though we've proven that's wrong, it's amazing the refrigeration industry will never catch up with us. And you have to ask yourself, now wait a minute. If this stumble bum, through nothing but dumb luck, stumbled upon, or God's guidance, stumbled upon this thing, why didn't GE, Borg-Warner, Carrier, Trane, Westinghouse, or any of these other people do it on purpose? So you wonder, why didn't they want to improve the heat pump? Well, the answer to that question is real simple. Our efficiency, because it takes less compression for the additional energy that you get. In other words, you use X amount of electricity to get 12,000 BTUs, but when you get 30,000 BTUs out of the same compressor, you don't use 3 times as much electricity. You only use 1.5 times as much, or 1.25 times as much electricity to get 3 times the energy. That's why our efficiencies are so great. Our efficiency, by the way, we put 1 unit of electricity into the compressor, we get an average of 6 units of heat delivered anywhere in America. 6 out, 1 in. That's the average. In the air-to-air heat pump that GE makes, you put 1 in, you get 2 out. Hey, what's your problem? That's 200%. You put 1 in, you get 2 out. What's wrong with you? You don't like that? No, I don't like that at all. You know why I don't like that? Because electricity is twice as expensive as gas, so where'd you go? So what happened was, right over here in Philadelphia, we built a heat pump. Put the heat pump on a guy's house, right down there in Philadelphia. Cold climate, get 4 seasons. Guy down there was the best guy you could ever put a heat pump on his house. Here's the guys I sold these systems to. You know the guy who from Popular Science gets the blueprints on how to build an airplane, brings them all home and builds his own little airplane and flies it around his own property? That's the guy I was selling heat pumps to. That wasn't the technical engineering guys. These are the guys that are like, hey, you got something new, I want to find out if it works or not. Pioneers. So these weren't average consumers. Most of the consumers who bought from us were wealthy people or doctors or people who said, man, I think that'll work. One of them was a guy who built and sold chemicals for Allied Chemical, one of them being Genetron, which is their equivalent of Freon. So, I mean, these guys knew it would work. Phew, they took one look at that and said, that'll work. From the diagram, they could tell that would work. I say, why didn't they tell somebody about that all along? So we get the system on this guy's house. The guy is what kind of guy? This is a guy who has kept records copiously for years on the energy production at his house. This is a man concerned. He can tell you on what day, what the degree days were, and when it rained, and when it snowed, and when it everything. He's got it all in this book that he has down by his furnace. And he's keeping copious notes. He used this many gallons of oil today. He even had little meters on it that would tell you how many gallons went through that thing today, with digital readouts on them. I mean, this is the right guy to put one of these units in his house. He was using an electric hot water heater, because most people do. It's easy, it's convenient. You can go pick one up, easy to install, hook it up. to electricity, you're good. And so, in essence, he was using an electric hot water heater, and so he was heating his hot water with electricity, and he was heating his house with oil. Well, when he had his oil burner, he was using 1,000 gallons a year to heat his house. 1,000 gallons a year. We come along, put one of our units into his house, our super heat pump. He uses no oil at all that year. So the oil man loses everything, the electric man loses 5%, and the customer's the only one that gains anything. We can't have this. Customers making the money and all the businesses losing money. This isn't the American way. I don't know who instilled all of this thinking into us, but somehow we've already even grown to accept this. Customers who say, oh yeah, that's the way it is. Well, dummy, why don't you change that? Do you like that? Do you think that's okay? That's the way it is? Why don't we change that? So people say, well, man, Dennis, with all this technology, they're going to kill you. I'm like, gee, what an observation. Do you like your country? We make a better way to do something and somebody's going to kill us. Hey, it's okay. It's the way we work. God, man. And the weirdest thing is we're in control. Or supposedly we are. Maybe we aren't in control because maybe we're too busy sending our responsibilities to other people who aren't looking out for our best interest, because there is no advocate for the consumer. Not really. Anyway, that's my little lecture. Now, so I went along and built this unit, and why wouldn't the electric company like it? Can you see? Why wouldn't the oil company like it? Can you see? Why wouldn't the heat pump manufacturers like it? And why did the heat pump manufacturers make the inferior heat pump? Why do they still do it to this day? Because the electric company likes the inferior heat pump. It uses more electricity.
More money.
Yeah, and it competes with oil, it competes with gas, but it doesn't eliminate oil or eliminate gas. The oil guys are like, okay, well, what the heck, there's room for everybody. The gas companies are like, yeah, all right, well, you can be here too because, you know, you're with the electric companies. We can't make them mad. And the electric companies are happy because we're selling all kinds of electricity, and the consumer's the one who's picking up the tab. That's the way it works. Now, so when I get out to Seattle, guess what happens to me? I've got the world's most efficient heating system, the world's most efficient heat pump, and Seattle, Washington has the biggest bond default in United States history. Tried to build 5 nuclear power plants, people didn't want them, and now they got to pay for the power plants without building them or putting any energy out of them at all, and the customers are going, ah! We used to have almost free electricity that went over the hydroelectric power plants. Used to cost us 1 to 2 cents a kilowatt, but now to pay for those Achilles heels out there, we're going to go to 10 cents a kilowatt. My God, we're going to be like those people on the East Coast. They ran panic buttons, full-page ads in Seattle Times, electric companies running the ads. Hey, if we can't have the power plants, we can't deliver the energy, we better find one heck of a conservation program here in the area. And so they perpetrated a hoax on the American people called the weatherization program. I didn't know it was a hoax. I thought it was real. I thought these people, when they say we want to save electricity, we want to conserve, we want to weatherize, we want to conserve energy, I thought they were serious. What a dummy I was. It took me a long time to figure out that whatever business says, they're probably doing the opposite. And so I really thought they wanted to save energy. So I went to Seattle because I was born in Washington State. Wow, I can come home. When electric's a penny a kilowatt, how much could I sell there? Nothing. Now all of a sudden my country, my state is in trouble, and I can be the hero. I already had planned out my speech. I was going to go like this as I went through the streets with the ticker tape streaming upon me in Seattle, Washington, in my convertible. And it worked a little bit different than that. Because, see, they really wanted to build the power plants. They really wanted to scare the people into, if we don't build the power plants, we won't have the energy. And I came along and said, we don't need the power plants because we don't need the energy. And they're like, who woke him up? Get him out of here. See, when you're busy BSing the consumers, you really don't want nobody around telling the truth. And so I got into a war in Seattle. I mean, I walked into that one big time. I was very naive at the time, And at the time I wasn't into altruism and I wasn't trying to save the world. I was just wanting to make a few bucks. And I wanted to take my good product. I felt good about myself. I don't think I ever in my life sold anything that made me feel better about myself than selling that heat pump. Because it worked. It was great. The customer really got a break. It was wonderful. So I started, I guess, growing up a little bit and becoming maybe a little bit altruistic because I was making money, lots of money, but I was also delivering a service. I felt real good about it. At the time, I had accepted God. I had Christ as my Savior, and I loved every bit of it. It was beautiful. I was tippy-toeing through the tulips and having a wonderful time with God. And so, as long as they missed, I didn't care. It was okay. And so, trying to kill me for some reason didn't even get me mad. It didn't upset me. I said, oh yeah, well, I'm like everybody else. That's the way it works. You do something good, somebody tries to kill you. That's the way it goes. That's America. That's our way of life. And so, for some reason, it didn't bother me. And then they sabotaged my warehouse, fine. They took a girl working in shipping there, wound up ultimately killing her. That one bothered me a lot. That got me really, really, really angry. I mean, I lost it. And that's when I said, okay guys, here's where we go. You think that's going to make me scared? You think that's going to stop me? Pal, you shouldn't have done this. You made me mad. So now it is no longer about anything except you people have to go down. You guys are out of line. You're running amok. Your power has gone to your head. You've become so arrogant that you have no respect for anybody. And so you got to go down. This is it. Sorry. Now, I had become worth $50 million in 18 months, to give you an idea how crazy I was getting. $50 million make you real crazy. So my personal net worth was $50 million. And I was starting to think, boy, there was a lot of stuff I could do. And the customers loved it. And by the way, the customers backed the Attorney General down. The customers stood for me in Seattle. We stood with them. And if you want to read that story, it's in the little green book I wrote called The Alternative. We can give you a copy of that. Read that story. It's worth reading. Tell you a lot about your country and what goes on in America as you tiptoe through the tulips with me. Let me take you through the experiences that I've had, and you can experience them yourself. Also, lots of documentation, because I think I really need to tell you, to give you documents to support all the claims that I make. Anyway, so you'll see it with your own eyes. I vowed that I would come up with a way to give the electric companies a competitor so that every person in America could have the option of either dealing with those criminals or doing something else to get all of their power. That's all. Simple vow. I had no idea how to do it. And you know why I did it? Because I was mad. That's why I did it. I had no idea how to do it. But I had money. I wasn't mad. I wasn't afraid of anybody. And I figured there must be somebody that knows how to do this. Now, we didn't care if it cost money. Understand that. We just wanted the customer to have an option of supplying their own power or getting the power from the central grid system. That's all. So that's what we did. This was in 1985. Anyway, I didn't know how to do it. So I hired a team of researchers, got them into the facility and said, okay, your first job is tell me how they make electricity. I have no idea how you make electricity. So here I am going to complete a thing to oppose the electric companies, and I don't even know how they make electricity. Give you an idea how set up this whole thing was. And they first explained to me how to make electricity. Now I'll tell you real quickly how they make electricity in case you don't know. They take a boiler, they put water in it. They then put heat into it to 1,000 or 1,200 degrees. I mean, it is real hot in there. So they got the boiler, the water is coming out, steam, high pressure steam. It hits the blades of a turbine. As it hits the blades of the turbine, they push against the blades of a turbine just like blowing on a pinwheel, or water coming across a paddle wheel. Paddle wheel turns, doesn't it? And as the shaft, the blades of the shaft turn, they cause the shaft to rotate. So it's a closed loop, and it's got to be steam through the thing, make the power, and on the other side condense the water to work. Now, so I said, okay, well, this is good, but I think we could do that too. How efficient is it? They said they put 3 units of heat over here in the steam boiler, So 3 BTUs of heat. They run through and they get 1 BTU of electrical energy. So they convert 1 of the 3 to mechanical energy, electricity. And then the other 2, they either lose through friction and heat losses in the turbine, but 50% of it, 1.5 of them, get thrown away to the ocean in the condenser. What? What? They're putting the heat in over here and they're throwing 50% of it away in the ocean? Why are they doing that? They have to. It's a closed loop. If they don't have a condenser, it won't run. Oh, okay. Will we have to do that too? Of course we will. It's the only way you can do it. You can't do it any other way. If you believe that, by the way, come to the meeting next weekend. Anyway, so that's the way they think, because that's what the book says and that's what the science says. And just like, you know, the refrigeration paradigm, you know, we control everybody by making them think these things. Anyway, and it is kind of true in a way. Now, so that's okay. Well, how do we do that? How can we make electricity? I got the most efficient heating system in the world. I can make 250 degrees. And they said, well, what are you going to do to water at 250 degrees? Boiling point is 212. How much pressure are you going to get? The water becomes steam. Is it going to push against the wheel and turn the turbine? No. You got to have 1,000 degrees, 1,200 degrees. You got to get some high head of pressure to push against that wheel. I said, well, how do we take my heat pump and make it get 1,000 degrees? So we started working on that. I mean, the problem with our heat pump is we got a compressor in there. The compressor will only operate at a certain temperature, then you break the compressor. So you can't get that hot with that compressor without breaking it. The other thing is, as you're going against it and you're pushing, that motor will only push against so much pressure. You go above that pressure, cook the motor, that's it, you're done. Compressor's over with. So I'm like, well, God, how can we get the pressure and the heat? Because if we get the heat, we got to have the pressure. How do we do it? So we started trying to reinvent compressors and stuff. Oh, it was a big mess. So I go to sleep at night, I wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, God's talking to me. What does he say when God talks to you anyway? He says, son, wake up, go get a pen, because you're a dummy, and if you don't get a pen and you don't write this down, you'll forget it, because my God knows me. And then he says, you know, I just got to share something with you, Dennis. You really are stupid. God is a nice guy, but, you know, he knows me pretty well. And so he says, man, he says, I don't think if I gave you all the time in the world, you'd ever figure this out. So why don't I just tell you how to do it? And so, am I kind of giving you the message that this was some sort of brilliant revelation that came to me? No. This was where God was clearly who he was, and I was clearly the dummy that I am, and he was the educator teaching the otherwise unteachable. And so now God is imparting this wisdom to me. It's not mine. And he says, okay, now, listen to me. You're this big heat pump guy, into refrigerants, into things that boil at low temperatures. Man, I figured you'd figure it out, but you still haven't figured it out, so I'm just going to tell you. Why are you frantically running around trying to get 1,000 degrees so that you can do all of this stuff to water to make electricity? Yeah, water boils at 212. But what temperature do all those refrigerants that you're playing with boil at? So why don't you take one of the refrigerants that boils at 100 degrees below zero, stick it in that boiler over there, and use your 250 degree heat source that you take from sun, wind, rain, snow, sleet, and hell more efficiently than anything on the planet, and heat it up. And if you're putting 250 degrees above zero on something that boils at 100 below, is it going to become a gas? Well, yes, Lord. Is it going to become a high pressure gas? I imagine it will. Reason why water becomes so high pressure is it's 1,000 and it boils at 212. Well, isn't something that boils at 212 that's in the presence of 1,000, isn't something that boils at 100 below in the presence of 250 above, isn't that going to get just as excited? I'm like, oh, no wonder you said I was stupid. I really am. Anyway, so the revelation set in. And not only did that revelation set in, A wonderful revelation set in at exactly the same time. Guess what that one was? And this one I was all of a sudden figuring out. I'm soloing. Lord, look at me, I'm soloing. What I figure out? I figured out that, hey, if I put 3 units of energy into the boiler, and I get that gas excited, and that gas turns the turbine, and I can convert one of them to electricity and throw 2 of them away to get them back, and then all of a sudden it hit me. I said, Lord, Lord, will that refrigerant condense? He's like, God, what have you been doing with those refrigerants all this time? Making hot water, condensing them. Right, Lord, right. Stupid question, Lord, sorry. And so it will condense. And so if I can throw 2 of them away and get one of them converted to electricity, and every time I put 3 in, remember how efficient the heat pump is? I use 1 unit of electricity, mechanical energy in the compressor. I get 6 units of heat in the boiler on the average. If I put 6 in, what is 1/3 of 6? 2. That means I get 2 units of heat. Why can't I put 1 of those units of electricity back in the compressor, take 6 more units of heat from the environment, throw 6 more in, and 1/3 of 6 is 2. 1 of them back into the compressor, and 1/3 of 6 is 2. 1 back in the compressor. What about this one? Hey, this is a benefit. Folks, I wasn't looking for it. I'm like, Lord, show me how I, in some practical manner, can deliver people energy in opposition to the other alternative they got, the grid system. I don't care if they pay for the electricity. I wasn't looking for free electricity, but that one hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, Lord, that's a bonus. That's free. Yeah, that's right. Now we're going to build a unit, and we're going to work together, and we got brilliant guys. The only dummy on the team's me, and I'm learning stuff. And so I'm getting smarter and smarter as time goes by because, you know, these guys I'm bumping shoulders with the brilliant guys. So I'm starting to learn things. And if you see that and you think that I know anything, it's because I bump shoulders with very brilliant people. If you bump shoulders with them, you'd know something too. And so that's my claim to anything, is that I've been next to such wonderful people. I went back and I talked to the man who built the modern day submarine, the hull design. This guy's a genius. He said to me, he said, Dennis, let me explain to you what the Carnot cycle is. Sadi Carnot came up with a formula for converting heat energy to mechanical energy. It says T1 minus T2 over T1. If you work that formula, you will determine how much electricity you can make. I said, oh, okay. What's that mean in English? He says, temperature number 1, your high temperature, which in this case would be 200 degrees, or in our case 70, minus T2, your low temperature. Well, if you're using ground temperature or water coming through the ground, it's 55 degrees. So if you subtract those two and you divide it by the high temperature, you'll get a percentage. That's the percent that can get converted to electricity. The electric company at 1,000 to 55 has 1/3 of it gets converted to electricity. On the angle you're at, 250 to 55, you'd be lucky if you get about 24% converted. 23% maybe. Well, my average is 6. He says, right, what does average mean? Well, he says, doesn't average mean half the time you're above that, half the time you're under that? So that means, Dennis, when you're under 6, you're in trouble. When you're above 6, you're fine. So he says, you only got a system that half the time can make free electricity. I was upset. I didn't want to have a system that half the time could make free electricity. I had become used to the idea that we're, by gosh, going to make free electricity. And so he says, oh, it's far worse than this. It's even worse than this. Now, by the way, what I'm saying right now is what all the engineers say that they think I'm saying whenever they hear me saying things, and these are the reasons why they think I can't do this, and I agree. Because of these reasons, I couldn't do it. They're right. Absolutely right. The other half of the problem was, remember, how long did we make electricity right here? Not very long. Because we had to have not a tank to hold the gas, but a condenser to condense it back down and send it back in again. Well, in order to have a condenser, you'd have to have a large volume of water, wouldn't you? Pulling all the heat off. That's why the electric company's down close to the ocean. Well, I would have to have a lake of water to be able to cool down all of this to keep that making electricity all the time. And so here's the other problem, Dennis. He says to me, he says, you can only do it half the time if somebody has a lake on their property. How many people have a lake on their property? Youch! So now I'm down to where half the time I can make free electricity if you have a lake on your property. Do you see how my market in America is kind of shrinking a little bit here? And he says to me, he says, I see the look on your face. He says, look, I worked for the Department of Defense. Remember that? I said, yes. He said, well, while I was working for the Department of Defense, guess what I built? I said, all kinds of things from what I understand from your son. He said, yes. But he said one thing was, I developed the world's most efficient engine. He said when they did that, they did it because it was a great idea. But then they built a working model, and guess what happened? They tried and tried and tried and tried to break it, but they couldn't break it. And somebody somewhere thought that wasn't a very good idea to have an engine that you couldn't break, probably General Motors. And so guess what they did? They scrapped the project. Sort of warms the cockles of your tax-paying heart, doesn't it? And so they scrapped the project. Threw $30 billion away. We can't have engines that you can't break. He says, Dennis, I no longer work for the Department of Defense. All the patents are in my name. Would you like to build that engine? Just to answer one question, does it have the Carnot problem? No, it doesn't. Why do you think I'm here? Okay, so anyway, the guy said $2 million, and he said 2 years. I said, okay, if I can raise more, then we can do it faster, yes. Now, so I went to California to try to raise $2 million, broke. I was picking up a little money, but kind of broke. But I had the world's greatest heat pump, so I started selling the heat pump and instructions on how to build the heat pump and that technology to raise capital to build the free electricity machine. Working great. But to do it, I had to set up a research facility, which is the tradition we're carrying on now. And I had to have heat pumps there that work, because you're not going to buy plans on a heat pump if you can't test the dumb thing. I had a heat pump in a walk-in freezer. We cranked the temperature down to 20 degrees below zero in dead airspace. Now imagine this, if you got any background in refrigeration, we're in dead airspace, the temperature's 20 below zero. We did it every single Saturday for an entire year. People from all over the world came to see it. We said, bring your own test equipment, take the thing apart if you want to. We had a $10,000 challenge to find any gimmick or anything in it. And every single weekend, we cranked the temperature down to 20 below in dead airspace, and we made water hot enough to burn your hand from energy we took out of that box at 20 below at a 2-to-1 COP. Same average performance of the GE heat pump in America. Only it's 20 below in dead airspace. And we challenged all the heat pump manufacturers to come anytime you want to, either find a hoax with us or bring your unit down and see if you can do that. Nobody ever came. A lot of customers came, lots of people from all over the world came, Pakistan, everywhere. So anyway, we're in here testing this every year, every weekend for a year. And a man came to the show one day, and what a guy this was. Now we're trying to build this thing. It's going to take 2 years and $2 million, and I'm raising capital selling heat pump things to get the money. And a guy walks in, and he comes up to me at the end of the show, and he says, Mr. Lee, I am absolutely astonished. I want to shake your hand, and I want to tell you, I have no doubt you have got the best heating system in the world. Yours tops everything out there from solar all the way down the line. You did it. But you need to know me. You know why you need to know me? Because I have built the world's most efficient heat engine, and you have got the world's most efficient heat source. This man's name was Dr. Fisher. And he indeed had already developed and invented an engine similar to the one we were going to spend $2 million building, except for one thing, he already had a working model. Wow. Here's the engine. Now, I have already said that it proves that they built the steam engine wrong. So we're going to show you there were 23 claims on this patent accepted by the patent office that proved they built the steam engine wrong. That's amazing. But the first thing they did, now remember when I told you about the steam engine, they got the boiler and they take water and they dump water in there. How much water do they dump in there? Less than the size of the boiler. Because why? Why do they do that? They got to have room for that water to expand and to become high pressure so it can push against that turbine. So they put a little bit of water in there. Now, this right over here is just a graphic example. That's all we're doing, just an example. You see that space? When this arm goes back, it does not go all the way back. There's a little space there. Do you see that? Now, the volume of this space is exactly the amount of volume of that liquid right there. So if I were to dump this liquid in here, it would fill this volume exactly. Now I could have a great big vat of it and just be taking a little dipper of it out every time I had a cycle, but I want in that vat for it to be totally full of liquid. So the first thing they did wrong with the steam engine is they just put a portion of the space in there with liquid and left the rest of the space there. That's the first thing they did wrong. Now, if I take water, or if I take isobutane, or if I take AZ50, or if I take anything and I put it in here, any liquid at all, I can use any liquid at all in the Fisher engine. Anything that's liquid I can put in. Everything that is liquid is going to have a boiling point, isn't it? Sure. There's going to be a point at which it boils. Guess what else everything that's liquid is going to have? It's going to have a critical temperature. What is a critical temperature? The critical temperature of that stuff right there is 160 degrees. You don't want to get it hotter than 160 degrees. What happens to it beyond critical temperature? Different things with different fluids. Sometimes they fall apart, sometimes they blow up, sometimes all kinds of different things happen with them. But you don't want them above their critical temperature because they're no longer giving you any benefit of the energy that you're putting into them. So you can use anything. Now, if we put water in here, what's the boiling point of water? 212. So 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So if I put water inside of here and I've got this capped off and there's no room in there and the water's all filled up there and I crank the temperature up to 212, what's going to happen to the water? Is it going to boil? Will the water boil at 212? If it's filled up completely and there's no room for it to expand, it won't boil. Nice try though. Okay? It won't boil. Because it can't boil because it has no room to expand. Now if I crank the temperature up to 300 degrees, is it going to boil? Can't. And if I crank the temperature up to 400 degrees, will it boil? You got water that boils at 212 under atmospheric pressure. It's now inside of a container filled to the top. It's 400 degrees and it still isn't boiling because it can't boil. Hey, if there's no room for it to boil, so you see why they made the mistake whenever they put the water in there and they left it plenty of room to boil? Hey, we don't want the water to boil. We want the water to contract. We want the water to expand molecularly but be pushing against itself. We want the water to build up pressure. And so we're going to be building up pressure, all right, not as high pressure steam. We're going to be building up pressure as high pressure water, high pressure liquid. Now if we crank the temperature up to 700 degrees, it's really packed in there. These things want to become steam like they have never wanted to become steam before in their whole existence. They want to become steam now, mister. But it's a pressure vessel and they can't. They can't escape. And we stop at 700 degrees. Mercy does, after all, triumph over judgment. And at 700 degrees we stop because at 720 that's the critical temperature of water and we don't want to go above the critical temperature of water. So we got it worked up just fine. It's 700 degrees. We're ready. It wants to become steam like it never in its life wanted to be steam. And then what do we do with this stuff? We immediately inject it into this space. We don't pour it into the space like I'm doing here for this example. And then I'll pull this back to kind of help it along a little bit here. We don't pour it in there. We inject it in there. Boom, it's in there. So at 700 degrees, it boils at 212 normally. It's 700 degrees, and it immediately hits this surface area of this piston. Now you got a flat surface on the piston, you get a hydraulic effect as this high pressure liquid hits the back end of the piston, and guess what? The liquid is against pressure everywhere in the vessel, and in here it can't go that way, but guess what? This is the prime mover, 700 degree water, and it is hitting the movable object. Now what do you think is going to happen when the prime mover hits the movable object? The object's going to move. So it now is pushing against this, and it's got all that pressure, and this is designed to move. And so what's going to happen is immediately, I mean right now, inject it in, and immediately the piston's going to move. Now when the piston moves, let's take a look at what just happened here. The electric company did it wrong because they wanted steam to come in here, and guess what else they did wrong? We're going to put one shot of this liquid in here. That is it. We ain't putting no more in there for the whole cycle. One shot is all you get. The steam engine, they just make that steam and they just start making up that steam. They say, okay, let her roll, Roy, just let her keep it coming. And that steam just keeps running right on through there. Boy, yeah, we're going to push something away, by golly. On this right here, we're putting one little shot of this stuff in here. It's under high pressure, it's 700 degrees. It wants to become steam like it never did in its lifetime, but it can't because there's no room to. And guess what it did? It just created some room. There's that much liquid there. See all that extra space there? Now, for the first time, doesn't it have room to expand and become steam? Yeah, it created the room when it went boom. Now there's room. And now that it created the room, it can expand, and it wants to expand, so what's going to happen? This is going to become steam now. Instantaneously, steam. Now when it goes from 700 degrees into steam, this is steam like you never saw steam before in your life, because they wrote the book wrong. If they'd have done this right, you could have had this kind of steam all along. But this steam is right now steam. It is a steam explosion. This stuff explodes into steam. Now when it explodes into steam, I'm saying this as in there's some major kind of power going on here. And as it explodes into steam, what is it going to do? It's going to start expanding as steam. We call this steam Fischer steam. You know why? There's no other steam like it. The molecules are the size of grapefruits here. Just wrap your brain around something that's been held back and all of a sudden is released. And you see the vision of what I'm talking about. As these molecules now, the size of grapefruits, are starting to roll down this piston, this cylinder, they're pushing against the blades of the piston. They're saying, man, let me out of here. It's kind of like shouting fire at a theater. And I mean, all these things are like, yes, freedom, liberation. They want to see how fast they can get to the end of this thing. Okay? And as they push their way out of this thing and continue to expand, do you notice something interesting happening here? You've only got the same amount of liquid, and so isn't the space getting bigger as it pushes against the wheel? And we're getting work over here, we're getting friction and heat losses, but as it's pushing against this, maybe causing work on a flywheel or something, as it's doing it, it is expanding the volume. So the more it expands as steam, the bigger the volume becomes. As the volume is getting bigger, is the amount of liquid in there getting any greater? No, one shot. So if I've got all the liquid in this much space, it's got one pressure-volume relationship. If I got the same amount of liquid in this much space, it's got a whole other pressure-volume relationship. PV equals nRT is the technical definition of what I'm talking about. Pressure times volume equals power. As the volume increases, what happens to the pressure? It decreases. Remember, whenever we take our heat pump and we take this volume of gas and shove it into this small space, the pressure increases. Smaller volume, bigger pressure. So it's the opposite way, the other way around. Bigger volume, Lower pressure. Well, guess what? The lower the pressure goes, then the lower the boiling point gets. So as the pressure is decreasing, as this is continuing to push, we're lowering the heat because we're translating heat energy into work. We're getting work out of the heat, so it's cooling down, getting cooler. It's also losing heat to the atmosphere, heat losses, and it's losing heat to friction. So as it's cooling down, it's still getting more and more volume. The pressure is lowering, so the pressure's lower, the volume's greater, the temperature's lower. What's happening here? Have you ever heard the phrase, he just ran out of steam? That's what's happening here. This is pushing across this, and it is running out of steam. It's cooling down. It's increasing in volume, lowering in pressure, and guess what? When you lower low enough in pressure, the whole boiling point changes. Hey, it's 212 out here. That's the boiling point because we're at only 14.5 atmosphere pressure. So as the pressure lowers, the boiling point lowers, and guess what? It's cooler than its boiling point, and anytime anything is cooler than its boiling point, what happens to it? Becomes a liquid. It condenses. And so if it condenses, it then falls out the bottom as a liquid. Now if it falls out the bottom as a liquid, why do we need a condenser to turn it back into a liquid? We don't. And so if we don't need a condenser to turn it back into a liquid, do we have to throw 50% of all the energy away to get it back to a liquid again? No. Now, here's a test for you. It's common sense. I don't know why the scientists can't figure it out, but it's common sense. Let's see if you can get it. If you don't throw 50% of the energy you put in away to turn it back into a liquid, won't it be at least 50% efficient? You're putting all the energy you didn't throw away right back into the next cycle. Ready to go on the next cycle. So you see, that engine would operate in a closed loop with no condenser. Now that was exciting because I then could make electricity anywhere using the heat that I could take out of snow in the middle of the night. I could make electricity, and I could do it more efficient than the electric company, and I could do it with no exhaust and no noise at all. And so one of my little heat pumps, one little horsepower of heat pump connected to one of these little engines over here at a total cost of about $2,500 cost to build and install it, could supply 100% of all the heat, hot water, and electricity for an average home all year long for free from energy it took out of the air. $2,500. Whew, wait a minute. Now, when the realization of all this started stinking into me, I started realizing why God had taken me out there to challenge them people in Seattle, and what had happened for him to be prodding me with that big horn all the way through all of this stuff to get me to the point that I was at right now. He knew I was too stupid and too stubborn to quit. My one claim to fame, by the way. And so now I had the wherewithal. I mean, they had just deposited the technology into our hands, and I could see why Victor said the two of us have become the most dangerous people in the world. Well, no good deed will go unpunished. I sat there thinking, boy, we can just save the world again, ticker tape parade, but this time I started going like a dog that's been hit a few times too many. Because I knew there wasn't going to be no ticker tape parade. I knew that I wasn't going to go through the streets in California, a hero's welcome. My God, you've solved all the environmental problems. Why do you need to have any fossil fuels? Why do you need to have any exhaust? Why do you need to have any of the pollution problems at all? We can power anything with mechanical energy, electrical energy, heat, resistance. What can't you make with electricity? I knew what was coming to me. The first thing was raided the research facility, boom. Then they came in there and arrested me, threw me in prison, threw me in jail. So they arrested me and threw me in jail. We were demonstrating the technology. We were just ready to demonstrate it, had working model, and boom, in the middle of the first demonstration, 600 people come down to it. I get arrested before the demo starts. 6 cops, one on every door. Got to get this boy out of here. He's about to tell the world about something that if he lets them know about it, it's over with for us. There goes the oil company, there goes the electric company, there goes the gas company. Oh, it gets worse. There goes the banks that own the stocks and bonds in the electric utilities company. There go the financial institutions that own the stocks and bonds in the electric utilities companies. There goes the economy. There goes the government. I don't know who the heck wouldn't have gone, other than the consumer. Consumer and I would have been great. Hey, we won. Me and the consumer can whip them all. That's just what can happen if you follow God. And so now we're standing there going, uh-oh, uh-oh. And so they threw me in jail. $1 million bail, big deal. They said I had not filled out a form for a civil code, which was a misdemeanor in the state of California. And he has to be a fraud because everybody knows you can't take energy out of there and make electricity for free. And he's telling people that he can. And so they got me for $1 million bail for having supposedly taken $20,000 from people on this fraud. What's wrong with that picture? Never been in prison before in my life. I mean, I just want to show you they were coming down with both feet. And then what happened was something that really upset me. While I'm sitting in jail, which is as good as anywhere because I can think there too, Vane was outside. The sheriff of Ventura County, California, or was it Nottingham, came and said to Vane, they met him, they said, look, now they were talking to a world-class scientist, a man who you can't discredit. By the way, also there was the father of the Boeing 747, be pretty hard to discredit him too. I had some highly prestigious scientists on my team here. Hard to discredit their testimony. They said, we don't think it would be good if you'd come to court to testify because we've already got enough witnesses for the state and we don't need any more. As if he would be a witness for the state. And they said, so therefore, if you come to court under any auspices to testify, we will kill you. We will also kill her, his wife was sitting next to him at the time, and we will kill your 3 sons. All of the technical experts were gone, leaving me sitting in jail, the only man on the team that had no credentials at all. What am I going to testify to in court? I mean, that's going to look kind of stupid when I say it will work, and they had their experts from the electric company saying it won't work. I wonder what they were there for. Anyway, so that was the idea. The idea was we'll just lock the boy up, put him in prison for about 20, 30 years. I would still be in prison, by the way. You wouldn't even be talking to me now. 20, 30 years, that's it. Throw away the key. It's all done. And a year later, I finally got the chance to bring a charge in against them for gross prosecutorial misconduct because I heard all the rumors about all the witnesses I had that had been threatened and why they ran away. So I said, okay, we'll have this out. They said, he has no witnesses at all. No one's willing to come forward, and he says that we committed a crime. Let's let him have his hearing because he can't prove it. Then he can say, we can say later, we gave him a chance to prove it. So here I am in court, no witnesses at all, got the sheriff on the witness stand. What happens? Something wonderful happened for you. This man who ran away, living in Europe for an entire year, trying to deal with himself. God. My friend is in prison. He'll be in prison for life. The world loses all the technology and looks like the big boys who screwed me all my life have just won again. Oh well, this time I'm for sure not ever going to pick up anything that has to do with inventing, and this time I'm not even answering the phone. Comes back and he finds out that I'm not in prison. He doesn't have to deal with himself because what the heck, he's in prison. What can I do now? He finds out I've got them on the witness stand on charges against them for gross prosecutorial misconduct. I got the enemy on the witness stand defending himself. He walks into his house, takes his hat off his head, slaps it down on the ground and says, I don't care. Honey, if they kill us, they kill us. I'm really sorry, sweetheart. Run wherever you got to run. I'm going to court. Boom! He comes to court voluntarily. Walks into court, and here's what he was saying. Hey, here I am. If he's guilty of doing something, I'm more guilty than him because I built the machines he's talking about. And by the way, the guy over there on the witness stand who said he'd kill me if I walked into court, you want to shoot me here, sir? Take me out back and shoot me. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of trying to live with myself. Oh, don't you know? People were scurrying. This was big news in that area. Not news that hit the news, because that never hit the news. I'm probably the most notorious criminal in America that never ever hit a newspaper. $1 million bail, and it didn't even make the newspaper. Imagine that one. Anyway, here I am in here, and he comes. I'm like, God, I love you, man. I love you, man. I love you. I always will love you. Here he is. He's doing it. He's got the courage. He's coming forward. I had 22 witnesses been threatened. None of them came forward. Here he is, first man in. And so now he says, I'm here. We put him on a witness stand. You can get a copy of all this court record. You can get a copy of this court record. Everything I say is documented. And this man walks into this thing, and he's on the witness stand. It takes us an entire day, voir dire, just to lay his credentials out. What did you do in your life? Whole day. At the end of a day of laying this guy's credentials out, the judge is like going, oh God, if this guy says anything favorable, we've had it. Oh, he says something favorable, all right. He says Mr. Lee can indeed take energy out of the air and run a system that makes electricity at absolutely no operating cost at all. And I take my whole reputation, all of my credentials, and lay them on the line. He can do that. And by the way, I was threatened not to come to court, not to testify. And so this is all court record. Then what happens? So many people in that area got so inspired because this man had the courage to come forward. They came forward. I trooped 22 witnesses in on the witness stand. Anybody in America that cares about it can get a copy of that transcript, and you can listen to 8 solid days of us and all of the witnesses that said that they too were threatened if they came to testify that something would happen to them. 22 of them. Now the father of the Boeing 747 airplane says, man, if he's got the guts, I got the guts too, and he comes to court. Who hasn't trusted this man with their life? And he sits on the witness stand, and he's just like Ed Wynn. This old man was so wonderful. What a witness. What a guy. Sweetheart. Judge falls in love immediately in spite of himself. He's fallen in love with this guy. Everybody is. The audience is cracking up, laughing. This guy's beautiful. And he says, Your Honor, of course Mr. Lee can take energy out of the air and make electricity for free. That's why we're here, isn't it? I think we all know that, don't we? The judge is like, oh, get me out of here. Wham, the hammer comes down. In my chambers now. They dismiss all the criminal charges against me for fraud. Not one newspaper anywhere in this country, not one. Where are the honest people in the media? Not one covers it. I mean, you got to get this in you. You got to get this in you. It's got to get in you. You got to know what is going on. While we let jerks and criminals and crooks control our lives, wonderful people who care very deeply, who are inspired by God to go out and take major walks off big-time cliffs, continue to do it for us. If they can take a walk off a cliff, for crying out loud, man, can't we change the political system in America? Can't we speak out? Can't we go down and voice what is going on with inventors across this country? You think this is happening to me? No, this is happening to every inventor out there. They know that if they come and do this, they will go through what I went through. They'll lose their assets, they'll lose maybe their life, they'll lose their family, they'll lose everything they have. So they don't bring them forward. They're out there all across America right now, things that could change your life. You know why they don't bring them forward? Because we don't help them bring them forward. It's our fault. I went across the United States of America telling my story. I told it in every state of the United States, and I got 1,000 people to join me telling my story. We put a media ad campaign together because the media wouldn't cover it, so we ran commercials. And we did a 60-second commercial cutting a power line and saying you can power your house with no electricity, external electricity, run your car with a new engine that runs with no gasoline. We did a 60-second commercial nationwide. As far as we can tell, about 10 million people saw it. And after that happened, that was too much. That couldn't be tolerated. And so I got a letter from the state of California inviting me to come back to California to go to court. So I flew back from New Jersey to California to go to court, and when I walked into the court, the judge said, "You're probably wondering why you're here," and I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, because I've been ordered by the state of California to put you in prison." And I said, "Well, that's really interesting. You're putting me in prison, but I've never been convicted of the crime. How do I go to prison without a trial and without being convicted?" And I said, "You can't do that, can you?" And he said, "Well," he says, "I've been ordered by the state of California to put you in prison, so that's where you're going, but sounds like you got a hell of a case for appeal." That, by the way, is a quote, and I do have the transcript. And then he said, I said, "Well, but how?" And he said, "Oh, you probably don't know how we do this. Basically, what you do is you go over to the guy over there that's got the gun on his hip. He puts the handcuffs on you. He takes you through that door, and you're in prison. Why don't we try it?" And so I did. I went there, and I was in prison for 2 years. By the way, in the 2 years that I spent in the California prison system were probably 2 of the most productive years that I've had in my life. Very, very productive. I've never had so much time to think, and actually I kind of enjoyed it. I hate to say that, but I kind of enjoyed my stay in prison because 17 inventions came out of my stay in prison, and I also wound up being the chief engineer, inmate engineer. I had access to a Bridgeport, to a lathe, to welding equipment, to all kinds of people who knew how to use it. And so it was a very, very fruitful and productive time for me. I wasn't upset. I went to the California state-sponsored think tank, and in essence, when I got out of there, I decided that it was very important that I make a statement to the authorities that put me there, and they were saying to me, "Look, we can do anything to anyone we want to do, anytime we want to do it, as long as we want to do it bad enough." And so what I wanted to do was say, "Look, when God is with me, I can do anything God allows me to do or tells me to do, whether you don't like it or not." And so I went across the street, got into a vehicle, went out and did a national television broadcast on how to make free electricity. That was my statement after I walked out of prison. I walked out of prison 2 years ago, and now we have rebuilt our whole national network of distribution of distributors. We're in every state of the United States. We're in every major county of the United States. We have people now who understand exactly how the government works, exactly how the big boys work, exactly how the energy companies work. And we've got it all figured out. And we've got far, far, far more technology than we ever had in 1987. We got a lot more money than we ever had in 1987. And we're about to rock your world. This right here is a concept. Now, I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I'm just going to show you the concept. Right here we have Freon in a bottle, AZ50. It's just a regular bottle at room temperature, about 70 degrees. And if I open this little stopcock, the Freon will travel through the yellow hose and back through the blue hose. The red hose isn't connected to anything. And it will go back in the inside of this. And if I push down on this lever right here, the Freon will go through this tube, and it will go into this chamber in the bottom, which is a large-sized pneumatic chamber. Now, this is a hydraulic concept. Right here, we have a reservoir, a hydraulic reservoir. Hydraulic oil comes through this tube right here when I have it open, and it goes and drains down and fills this chamber right here. This is a hydraulic cylinder. So on the top we have a hydraulic cylinder. On the bottom we have a gas or pneumatic cylinder. As the gas expands out of this tank, it pushes against the bottom cylinder, and as the bottom cylinder comes up, it also has an arm on the top cylinder, and so as the bottom cylinder comes up, it's pushing against this hydraulic fluid on the top cylinder. So if I have gas coming out of this cylinder at 100 pounds per square inch, and by the way, at our temperature now, it should be about 120, 125 psi. But if it comes out of here at 120, 125, let's say 100 psi, it comes out of here and it goes into the bottom. It's going to push against this bigger cylinder at 100 psi. Now the big fat cylinder is 15 times as big as the little skinny cylinder on the top. So if it pushes against here at 100 psi and this one's 15 times as big as the little one, guess what pressure it's going to push on the little one at? 15 times 100 is 1500 psi. So by merely releasing gas out of a bottle here, Freon gas out of a bottle, who would have ever thought you could do anything with that? We could be making 1500 to 2000 psi hydraulic fluid over here. And then of course we'll talk about what we're going to do, but first I got to make that for you. Now as it comes out of here, I'll close this off. That means the hydraulic fluid can't get back here. It could come through over here and we could open that. If we did, then it would go back out to the hydraulic reservoir. But we're going to close this one too, and we got a gauge over here. So now we've trapped the hydraulic fluid in here. So when I open this up, if I push down on this, then what happens is as the gas expands into here, this pressure gauge should go to somewhere around 2,000 pounds per square inch. That means that we're able to take Freon out of a bottle and make 2,000 psi hydraulic fluid. And by the way, with 2,000 psi hydraulic fluid, you can run motors. Can you imagine running a motor from just expanding the gas out of a Freon bottle at room temperature? Kind of hard to imagine. All right, now, are we ready to do this? Then we'll just go ahead and do it. Let me open this up. You'll see the gauge jump over here because it's got the pressure on it. And then we're just going to expand it into the bottom, and you should watch this one go up. See it? About 2100, 2200 psi. So we have made 2,000 pounds per square inch hydraulic fluid, just allowing the gas Did I do that right? Yeah. Okay, you go ahead and set it up. Just allowing the gas to expand out of there. Now, this right here is a hydraulic motor. The hydraulic motor runs because the high pressure hydraulic fluid runs in one side, comes out the other, causing this shaft to rotate. So this one right here will put out about 45 horsepower. One a little bigger than this is 76 horsepower, and that is one that's put out by Volvo, just a little bigger than this one. Now, if I had 45 horsepower, this runs maximum at 2,000 pounds per square inch. So can you imagine being able to put 45 horsepower out of this from Freon that I'm expanding out of a bottle at room temperature? The pressure's there, 100 psi, 150 psi. And then I could drive this. Can you imagine then if I took one of these engines, one of these motors, and put it down on the wheel, the left wheel of your car? Then put another one up here on the front wheel of your car, front left. Put one over here on front right on your car, this wheel, and put one on the back wheel of your car. And I had each one of those tires, each one of those wheels had its own little hydraulic motor, and the hydraulic motor was running each wheel. Does anybody here want four-wheel drive? Now, the amount of power that we've got on Freon expanding out of a little Freon bottle directly into here, we're going to run it back in again, but this time we're going to run it over to this apparatus. Now this apparatus here is hydraulics. You notice this baby right here, if you turned it on its side, you got that one right there. That's the sister to this one. Okay, same thing, 15 to 1. So if I take the Freon out of the bottle and I run the pressure into this, I then get the hydraulic fluid. If I run the hydraulic fluid up here and bypass all of this and go into an accumulator, then I could pump up this fluid and just be like this, as I'm going to be doing in a minute. And every time I do that stroke, I will be making 2,000 psi hydraulic fluid come into this accumulator. So if I sit here and pump it for a little while, I'll fill up this accumulator with 2,000 psi hydraulic fluid. Then, when I want to, I can allow that hydraulic fluid to escape into this little hydraulic engine right here. So we got a little hydraulic motor. The little hydraulic motor takes 1 cubic inch of that hydraulic fluid for a rotation. Now this is 13 cubic inches in size. This takes one cubic inch to run this whole rotation of a wheel. And so I would get 13 rotations on one. So if I sit and go for a little while and build it up, then I could be sitting here running this, and the big wheel, you notice how big it is, turns the little wheel, which runs the generator, and he hooked out all the way back there to them same lights up. And so now let's light the light bulbs from energy we take out of a Freon bottle at room temperature. So we're going to show you that we can light those same lights from energy we take out of the room at room temperature in a Freon bottle. It's the reason why I'm showing it to you. All right, let's just pump it up. Okay, now we pumped it up, so we now have 2,000 pound Freon hydraulic fluid in here. Now if I turn this, it's going to allow it to go into this motor here, and that's going to light up the light bulbs. Ready? Let's do it. Those light bulbs right over there will be the ones that light. Okay, let's go. Okay, so we light the light bulbs from energy we're taking out of the room in a regular little Freon bottle. Power? Yes, indeed, power. But now let me tell you the best part. The best part is, when we were down there at those panels, remember I told you that when we had R12 in there, we had so much pressure in there that it was popping all the nipples. So it popped all the nipples on it because the pressure was 500 pounds per square inch. Now we can control all of that easy enough, but that means that we can get 500 PSI out of R22 in there, more with our AZ50, but 500 PSI. Now if I can magnify the pressure from 500 PSI 15 times, what's 15 times 500? Anybody? 7,500. That means I could get not 2,000 PSI, I could get 7,500 pounds per square inch by just moving the refrigerant into those panels. And how do we get the energy transfer? Well, because we've got the sun shining on them, the wind, the rain, the sleet, the hail. But guess what? If we're rolling down the road and we got wind going across them, remember the best thing that happens to that panel down there is airflow, because you get more exchanges over a given period of time. Take a truck. On the sides of the truck, put those 8-foot by 3-foot panels all along the side of the truck. How many of them could you put along there? And you can put them on the top as well. And as it travels through the air, imagine that 60-mile-an-hour wind going across that thing, making all those exchanges that are instantaneous heat transfers, and you get the idea of what I'm talking about here. 7,500 PSI is a lot of PSI. This right here, this baby right here, also, if you look on the back of it, we got these little hydraulic hoses that are going into the back of this, because this is not only the hub of a truck tire, this is also a hydraulic motor. So built right into the truck tire is a hydraulic motor. This hydraulic motor here maxes out. It is the maximum that it can take at 5,000 PSI. Now, if this maxes out at 5,000 PSI, and we know we can get 7,500 PSI from them panels, can we get the power we would need to be able to drive this hydraulic motor here to turn the wheels of the truck tire? Now, also, it takes volume of hydraulic fluid. This intensifier puts out 13 cubic inches. This one puts out 13 cubic inches. Let me tell you something interesting. This one runs at 26 cubic inches. Does that give you an idea? If we had those two together and we were just running them together, taking the energy from the air from the Freon and just creating 26 cubic inches of that fluid and consistently feeding that 26 cubic inches of fluid in here at 7,000 PSI, we'd probably blow this up. So we'd have to cut it down to 5,000 PSI. We couldn't go above 5,000 PSI. We just control the gas and we can do that. So we could max this out. Well, how much power is there in this engine right here? Well, this motor right here. This motor actually puts out 500 horsepower. Now, if you had one on the back wheel and one on the other wheel of a truck, that's 1,000 horsepower against the wheels going down the road. If you wanted one in the front, or one on each side in the front too, or in any of the other tires, then you'd have 2,000 horsepower. And all you would have to have for 2,000 horsepower is 8 of those intensifiers, and you have plenty of space for panels to be able to keep that gas a-coming. Now, this is kind of an interesting concept, isn't it? Now, I'm going to show you, we've got this hooked up here with a little electric motor. It's plugged into electricity, no problem, that is electric. We're cheating big time. This right here is a hydraulic reservoir. So as we suck the hydraulic, as we take the hydraulic fluid through the pump, we then will be running it past this pressure gauge and back in again. So as we turn it on, I need somebody to come up here and read this gauge for us and tell us what the pressure of this gauge is. Anybody? You want to come? All right. There's the gauge right there. Tell us what the pressure is.
It's about 75.
Yeah, right? 75 right on the nose. 75 pounds per square inch, right? Okay, so we are now putting pressure on this at 75 psi. Now, is 75 psi a little less than 2,000 psi? Is it a little less than 7,500 psi? Whoa! Now, so at only 75 psi, I want to show you something interesting about this motor. It runs. Now, if it runs with any kind of torque or power on it at 75 psi, what would it do if it was running at 2,000 psi? He's going to open a torque wrench that has never been used before. This is a Sears Craftsman torque wrench. Good torque wrench. Brand new one. And what we're going to do is we're going to hand this to Mike, and Mike is going to try to stop the wheel here so we can see if there's any power at 75 psi. Is there any power on this? As he tries to stop it, by the way, it's going to go in foot-pounds of torque, and as this needle goes in, it goes all the way up to here. It's 150 foot-pounds of torque. Okay, so we're going to see what Mike can do here. All right. And now, when you're ready, I'm going to turn this on. Mike is going to try to stop this, and this needle is going to go down here somewhere, maybe right about there, and that'll be about 80 foot-pounds of torque. Or maybe it'll go all the way to the end, 150 foot-pounds of torque. Let's see what kind of torque we got at 75 psi. We all ready? Okay, here it goes. Maxed it out. So it went all the way off the end of this thing, 150 foot-pounds of torque. Now, so if it does 150 foot-pounds of torque, has all that capability to pull a load at 75 psi, what would it do at 7,500 psi? Take the panels and put them on a railroad car. Hey, if you could put them on the side of a truck, why can't you put them on the side of a railroad car? So all these panels are on the side of a railroad car. They use a locomotive that uses 2,500 horsepower or 3,800 horsepower to pull 50 trains. That's what it does. It pulls 50 trains, 3,800 horsepower. So if you divide that out by 50, you get 76 horsepower on every single one of those box cars. That's what it takes to pull a box car, 76 horsepower. Now this little hydraulic motor over here that uses 2,000 psi is almost that, and the one that Volvo makes that's a little bigger is that, 2,000 psi, 76 horsepower. Now, 76 horsepower could pull the train, so I could pull, not this big one, that little bitty motor right there, down there, take the energy right from the side of the boxcar, from the air that is traveling through, and get all the energy to supply that wheel, and be able to run the train on the energy we get right from the evaporators that could even start out, just because the sun shines on them, could even be getting it started out at a lower pressure, because you notice at 75 psi it turns, doesn't it? It's just at 7,500 psi it turns a lot bigger and a lot more power and force. It still has force right here at 75 psi, doesn't it? And so therefore, we could actually power the choo-choo trains from the energy we take out of the air they're traveling through and not even have a locomotive. Every single railroad car is its own energy source. Okay, now I want to show you something else, because this is kind of important. You remember we've already discussed with you the Fisher engine cycle, and this right here is a 318 Chrysler engine. Chrysler Corporation built it. We did not build this engine. Chrysler Corporation built it. It's from their foundry. It has spark plugs on this side, it has the valve cover, and it has not in any way been modified on this side of the engine. Same engine that Chrysler built. On this side over here, it's the same engine Chrysler built, but it's been modified. And the modification over here, this is an 8-cylinder engine. It's a V8 engine. It is the smallest V8 engine Chrysler made. Smallest one. And on this side over here, we got 4 cylinders and 4 over here. We have modified 2 of the cylinders over here. So we've got 2 cylinders modified, because on a V8, if you modify 2 cylinders, you can run it. And so we're able to run the engine just on these 2 cylinders over here that we've already modified. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we want to show you that when we modify this to no longer run with any combustion, you notice there's no spark plugs over here. No spark plugs at all. There'll be no carburetor. And we'll run the engine with no combustion whatsoever. No gasoline, no spark plugs. And in essence, when we run it, we want to see if it has any power. So we're going to try to express to you the kind of power output this engine will have when we modify this engine to the new process. Now, the process here that it's been modified to is called the Fischer-Brauer cycle. Now, this guy right here is Eric Brauer. Come on over here, Eric. This guy right here is Eric Brauer. This is a real good friend of mine. And this is a young man who's a race car driver who is every bit as crazy as I am, except he's younger. See, this is the next generation. And so it just gets worse and worse. They just keep coming. Anyway, this is a specification sheet put out by Chrysler on the Chrysler engine right here. The little circle on the bottom is the engine that you see in front of you. And it says, if you go over to about line number 5, that at 1600 RPMs, this is supposed to put out, with all 8 cylinders going, about 260 foot-pounds of power, so torque. So it'd have 260 foot-pounds of torque at about 1600 RPMs. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start this, we're going to activate 1 cylinder. When we activate the 1 cylinder, we are going to have a torque wrench on this, and we're going to measure the foot-pounds of torque that we're getting from 1 cylinder on this thing, so that we can see if we had all 8 cylinders going, how many foot-pounds of torque we'd be getting from this engine process, the Fischer-Brauer cycle. Now, we're starting from a dead stop, though. It's not like we're going 1600 RPM and then we come in with a prony brake and we measure the torque. We're starting from a dead stop. Now, if you're at 1600 RPM, it's going to be more to your advantage, because at 1600 RPM, you got all that momentum going for you. And so to do this from a dead stop is dramatically handicapping ourselves, but we're going to go ahead and handicap ourselves and see how much power we have from a dead stop on, and see if we have the same kind of torque that you should have on that engine if you were running it with the spark plugs and the gasoline. Now, right here then it says that the way to measure this, we have 8 cylinders, and this way that this is set together, we're getting power on every stroke. So we get power on every stroke. The way it's normally set up on an 8-cylinder, you get power every other stroke. We have changed this to get power on every single stroke. Now, if we get on 1 cylinder 100 foot-pounds of torque, when it travels all the way through its travel, 100 foot-pounds of torque, there would be 2 of these cylinders up at any one point in time. So 2 pistons will be up together. So if one of them went through a whole cycle and got 100 foot-pounds, to compensate for the other one that would be going through the cycle at the same time, you should double the torque that you get from 1 cylinder. So the torque you get from 1 cylinder would be doubled. So if we got 100 foot-pounds on 1 cylinder, we'd be getting 200 foot-pounds on the 2 that are up together at any time. Then the other 6 pistons are somewhere in their travel while this is going on, if you had it actually functioning and running. And so to compensate for the other 6 cylinders, take what you get on the 2 power strokes and divide it in half, and that'll give you the compensation of the other 6 cylinders. So if on 1 cylinder I got 100 foot-pounds, I'd have 100, and 100's 200, half of that's 100 is 300 foot-pounds of torque. So in other words, take what you get on one of them, divide it by 3, and that's the power that you'd be getting. Now, in order to do that, if I'm going to get 260 foot-pounds, if I got 85 foot-pounds out of one of these cylinders, then 85 foot-pounds times 3 would be the 260 foot-pounds. So the biggest V8 engine Chrysler makes, this is some data on the biggest V8 engine Chrysler makes, and if you go over about 5 lines and you look there, you see that it's a whole lot more torque than on this little smallest V8 engine Chrysler makes. And as a matter of fact, if I got 125 foot-pounds on this one that's been modified to the Fisher-Brauer cycle, if I got 125 foot-pounds on that one cylinder, multiply that times 3, and I would be getting as much power out of the smallest V8 engine Chrysler made as we would be getting out of the biggest V8 engine Chrysler made. Now, wouldn't that be a kick? Now, this right here is the same torque wrench, Sears Craftsman, and if it goes, when we put it on here, if it goes up to about here, that's the 85 foot-pounds of torque, about halfway across this. If it goes all the way out to here, that's 125 foot-pounds of torque. So if it goes within about an inch of the end, then we are getting as much power out of this as we would be getting out of the biggest V8 engine Chrysler makes. If it goes right to about there, about halfway across these numbers, then we're getting the same torque out of this as Chrysler gets out of it when they burn gasoline in it and run it as a regular small V8 engine. All right. Okay, just pull it out and push it in there. Okay. All right, now, so what we have done then is we've got it set up to where as he activates one cylinder, we're going to get, the motor's going to start trying to turn, the engine's going to try to turn. As it does, this red line is going to go over either to here and be the same power that Chrysler gets, or over to there and be the power of the biggest V8 engine Chrysler makes. Wouldn't that be a kick? Okay? So now when he's ready, we're going to turn that on. Is everybody all set? You ready to do it? Close up on that, and why don't you just go ahead now, just crank it in and activate that thing. Let's go. Hold it, hold it. I love this demonstration. I love it, man. We destroy one of these torque wrenches every single Saturday. This is guaranteed for life, by the way, from Sears Roebuck, so Sears is sponsoring this. Okay, now, over here is the same torque that Chrysler would get on that engine, and over here's the torque that they'd get from the biggest V8 engine that they make, and I don't know what the heck this is out here, but this is all off of one cylinder. By the way, we've calculated that actually, with knowing more about what we're doing now that we're a little further along the road, with the same thing that we're doing, we're going to get somewhere around, what's the torque on this engine? This isn't totally accurate because when you get off of this, it kind of goes askew. What's the whole torque you get on the V8?
I calculate that with the pressure available here, which we'll be able to do if we on the Fisher process in the vehicle, we should be able to hit those higher pressures. We said somewhere between 1,200 and 1,800 foot-pounds of torque.
Right. Now, 1,200 to 1,800 foot-pounds of torque, 260 is what they were, but the largest truck, semi-truck, runs on about, what, 1,400?
Yeah, the really big ones, I think, are around 1,450 these days. With the
1,450 foot-pounds of torque. So we'll get between 1,200 and 1,800 foot-pounds of torque, probably more like 1,500 foot-pounds of torque, off of the smallest V8 engine Chrysler made. I want you to understand this is the very first unit that we had, and this engine, when we turn it on, we have an exhaust right here. This engine is not closed loop. We're making it closed loop, but what we did initially was just prove that the whole concept would work. And so when Eric put it together, it's open loop right here. So whenever we do this, we're utilizing CO2 right here. This is CO2 in a canister. We're going to run CO2 into the heads, and then we're going to allow the CO2 to come out of here. And so since it has an exhaust, it's going to make noise. Normally, it would come out of here, it would be condensed, we would run it back into the top of the head, and it wouldn't make any noise at all. So I just wanted to warn you, there will be noise here. And also, this header, there would be a header over this, and so this little apparatus here is going to make a clicking noise, and so you'll hear that noise. But here's what we're going to do. With CO2 in the bottle, we use that because it's user-friendly. If we used isobutane or pentane or something, you guys get mad at us because it would smell really bad in here. And so this is user-friendly, so that's why we're using the CO2. But CO2 in here is going to come out of these exhausts, and it's going to come out white as snow. So as you see it coming out, it's going to come out like crystallized. It's going to be white as snow, and then you're going to know that it is condensing in the cylinder. So it's coming out condensed in the cylinder, and it would be easy to then recycle. Okay, now let's have Eric come over here and explain to you guys what he did here.
One of the reasons we get to multiply the torque so much off of the reading of one cylinder is because we're running this engine as a two-stroke instead of the four-stroke the way it used to be run. So what happens is you can, just to get you down the road where you had to run, say, maybe 75 psi in the cylinder to give you enough force to cruise a flat and level surface at 60 miles an hour, now you'll be able to back that off to probably about half. And the lower bearing shells on the rod bearings and stuff aren't going to see as high a peak as they go down the road through the, or average peak I should say, as they go down the road. So you'll be able to have a little bit less wear that way. Another thing is that on the combustion process that you get, there's almost never a perfect burn of what happens in the cylinder. The catalytic converter is there because it's supposed to burn the fuel that didn't burn in the engine. So you don't really burn all the fuel in the engine the way cars are set up now, and that means some carbon is in the cylinder after combustion. And that slips past the rings, and it acts like sandpaper as it gets past the rings, and it tends to wear the ring and then the cylinder wall out. And then when it gets in the oil, it makes your oil black, otherwise your oil wouldn't be getting black if it wasn't for this. And the particles are so fine, some of them get through the oil filter and they go down the oil, and they act like very fine sandpaper on your main crankshaft bearings and help the engine wear out, as well as getting splashed up from the crankshaft in there on the cylinder walls, even unfiltered. So you have the wear that you get on the engine from a combustion engine that you won't have on this because of that. And then you also have the heat that's created by the combustion process that gets the top of that piston up to, say, 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And when things are hotter, they wear down quicker. So we'll probably be running less than 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And the piston will probably average half of that or less. So we're running a lot lower temperatures for another thing. And the other thing is this engine can have its crankshaft crankcase sealed, so you don't have outside air, oxygen, and moisture able to get into the oil. So your oil will not get acidy and contaminated like it does in a regular car now. So that means that your oil will probably never have to be changed for the life of the engine, and with all of the other things that reduce the friction and wear in the engine, you're probably looking at somewhere around 400,000 or more miles that you can get between rebuilds.
Okay, $1,500, modify any car, and you no longer have a gas tank, you no longer have an exhaust system. But how do you power it? If you don't have a gas tank, how do you put the energy into it? Well, this right here is a takeoff on a thing called the Hot Box. It is the world's most efficient thermal storage device. We devised this device actually a long time ago, and I'm going to just give you a brief version of it now, and I'll tell you more when we get over to that side. But right here in this thing that I'm holding, we have a special chemical that can hold two chemicals. One of these chemicals, which we're still testing for stability, can hold about 300,000 BTUs right here in this little tube that I'm holding in my hand. 300,000 BTUs of heat energy. But with the other stuff that we've already tested, that we already know what it is, we can hold about 60,000 BTUs right here. Now, if you can imagine, these little things go into a compartment here that have insulation on them, and also we wind the whole thing in carbon fibers on the outside, which withstands 250,000 pounds per square inch. So impact, you could take this and drop it down the Grand Canyon when it's wound with carbon fibers and you can't destroy it. Nothing you can do to hurt it in any way. We have a hot little bullet, that bullet right there on the inside, that's about 2,000 degrees, and we got this thing sitting right up here inside the engine compartment. We lined the inside of the engine compartment with these, and every one of these things have from 60,000 to 300,000 BTUs of heat energy in them. All you have to do is remember to plug actually not this little cord because that's a small one, but it would be a much bigger, more beefy cord. Plug that into the electricity at your house, and then this will charge in the evening, and you'll have enough energy on site that if the one thing that we use, we have to use that, you'll have to charge it once a week. But if the other chemical that we're checking for stability right now turns out to be what we think it is, then you'd only have to plug it in once a month, and you'd have all the energy you need for a month's worth of driving by plugging it into electricity one night, overnight, while you sleep. Wake up in the morning, you're ready to go for another month's worth of driving. So you never stop at a gas station. But why would you use electricity, you ask? Because we over here have got a technology that can take the energy right out of the air through the world's most efficient heat pump, couple it with a Fisher heat engine, and produce electricity totally for free at your house. Okay, what is happening right here is this is a direct drive compressor. This direct drive compressor takes Freon from the panels, and it runs that because this direct drive is causing the pistons to go up and down. That gives us heat into the boiler. The boiler expands the other Freon back through that into a double-acting piston that's going back and forth. We're converting with mechanical apparatuses, we're converting that into shaft rotation. That shaft rotation turns this wheel. As this wheel turns, it causes the compressor to turn. As the compressor supplies the heat, it causes this wheel to turn. You might say these two wheels are powering each other. And by the way, once the Freon has taken the heat, it then made the power, it then goes up here. This is a condenser. We're sucking water out of the bottom of the tank, could be the well. And we're running the water through this pump right here that's also driven by the same drive mechanism, running the water into this condenser. It's the world's most efficient condenser at 100-degree delta T, 6 million BTUs. And as we're then running the water through, we're making the water hotter, but the water will also be being pumped. And as I do this, I'll show you the water being pumped. And then also, we're cooling down the Freon, which is going into this canister and is being pumped right back into the boiler by a little trombone pump that's running on the same cylinder. You ready to try it? Let's go ahead and try it. Let's turn it on, guys. Okay. Now, by the way, you notice that it is pumping water. I can never do that because, there you go. Thank you. All right, you notice the water is running. So it is pumping water from energy taken out of the air, and we'll light the lights too from excess energy. So the lights are being lit from excess energy from the air. They're pulsing. It wasn't set up to do that, so we don't have it stable, but we thought we'd just demonstrate the excess power that we have. Main thing is it's pumping water. It's supposed to be pumping water. That's a closed loop because it's continuing to go through the boiler and in back.
By the amazing technologies and concepts you've just witnessed, now you can get even more valuable information and details from the New Energy series. 5 full-length videos, 9 hours of in-depth conversations and demonstrations of free energy systems. Explore the worlds of inventors and theoretical physicists who are changing the paradigms of science. Volume 1 features Tom Bearden.
In particle physics, any electrical charge is automatically a broken symmetry. Now what this means is there is a virtual photon flux, a violent flux exchange between the vacuum itself, which is filled with this virtual photon flux.
Volume 2, John Hutchison.
I feel that that is also true. I think the Mayan Connect is also a cohere of frequencies and transmit them out and then lock this doorway into space and time.
This motor here drew 12.5 amps.
Volume 3, Joseph Newman.
This motor right here only draws 7.5 amps. And look at the size of the propeller. Look at the size of the propeller. Look at the size of the motor. Look at the size of the motor. Now this is exactly what I teach throughout my book. I taught it to Dr. Hastings. I've taught it to the world. that the larger you make the mass, then the smaller amount of power it will take and the more power it will produce.
Volume 4 highlights Troy Reed.
This is an old mechanical device. It's got 2 inner wheels on the inside, 2 outer shell wheels with magnets. They got 8 magnets on this side, 8 magnets on the inside here. Let's see what kind of torque we got at 75 psi.
Volume 5, Dennis Lee.
Okay, here goes. Maxed it out. So it went all the way off the end of this thing, 150 foot-pounds of torque. This engine.
They're just $29.95 for each tape.
Now the process
or get all
here,
5 for $119.95, a savings of $30. Place your order today. Call 1-800-795-TAPE, T-A-P-E. Or write to Lightworks Audio and Video, Post Office Box 661593, Los Angeles, California, 90066. And now you can order this and many other fine tapes on the internet at www.lightworksav.com. That's lightworksav.com, as in Lightworks Audio and Video.
Well, then you just take that hot gas and run it into a heat exchanger. And so a heat exchanger would be a tube that has a tube running through the middle of it. And you got a hot tube where the gas comes out, maybe 200, 250 degrees, and then you got that tube running through the middle of it that's got cold water in it. Remember, hot goes to cold, and so therefore if you got the hot gas and you got the cold water running through the middle of it, where's the heat from the gas going to go? Into the cold water. And pretty soon you're not going to have cold water, you're going to have hot water. Well, that's what you want with a solar system, isn't it? Hot water? Sure. So we said, an idea is born. So we had a collector, we have a water pump or a gas pump, in our case a gas pump. We're running the gas back down and we're elevating the temperature of the gas. And so now we can, with hot gas, make hot water. So we said, wow, that sounds like a great idea. Now, the reason why it hit us as an idea was not because we were technical, not because we were engineers, because none of us were, but because we were salesmen. And we said, man, we went down and we spent days at the malls. This is in 1974, 75, 76. This is the era. And in those days, let me tell you something, the malls were filled with energy shows. We got this big energy crisis. The Arabs are holding America at gunpoint. This is tantamount to war. We've got to do something about this. We've got to conserve energy. And so now all of a sudden energy shows hit America. And so for a marketer, it was a marketer's dream. President of the United States declares war on energy. It was a marketer's dream. But we would go through the malls, and at 9 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock at night, what does a salesman do to demonstrate a solar system? What do you do in the middle of a mall at 7 o'clock at night to demonstrate a solar system? No sun. So you know what they would do? We used to call it the moose call. It was funny. You'd be in the mall, you're walking along, and all of a sudden you would hear, bang! And then you walk a little further and you hear, bang! And you'd say, somebody's demonstrating a solar system. Now, what could they do with a solar system? Well, there's no sun or anything, but they got the glass on top of their panels, and they would be banging the glass to prove to you that no matter how hard you hit that glass, you couldn't break the glass on their solar system. And that's why their solar system was the best. Can the other guy do this to the glass on his solar system? It's the only thing you could demonstrate. So you'd hear it, bam, the moose call through the thing. And we said, boy, this would be neat. Now, if we developed the solar heat pump would have the evaporator. You can throw rocks at it all day. You can't do anything to hurt that piece of metal. I mean, what are you going to do here? I mean, throw rocks at it, do anything. You're not going to hurt it. There's no glass, there's nothing. But we don't want to bang this. Instead, we were sitting here with this thing sitting in the middle of the mall. The temperature in the mall is what? 70 degrees? This takes heat out of 40 degrees below zero. So we just sit there and make hot water for them from the energy we're taking right out of the mall. And so we're not going bam, we're actually making. So we go back, we got 50 pounds of refrigerant. Normally the heat pump we had used 5 pounds of 4 or 5 pounds of refrigerant, but we got 50 pounds of refrigerant. We got this massive evaporator. We got this 2 horsepower compressor. We got this 6-ton condenser. And we don't know how to charge it. How much do we put in this thing? We don't know. So here was the formula. We'll just start dumping this stuff in here until it works. That was the formula. So here we are dumping refrigerant into this thing. We get to 49 pounds. We got 1 pound left in the bottle. We're praying, God, please, we don't even know you, but make it work. Amazing how many people pray to God that don't even know him, isn't it? And anyway, all of a sudden, this thing starts, and it's working. And finally the sun goes down, and it's nighttime, and the temperature goes to like 70, 75. Yes, yes, it's working. Yes, we're taking energy out of the air, and the sun is down. So we waited a while. It's working. Every one of us went out and grabbed every friend we had in the world. All 3 of them came back. And so now it's actually, anybody can put their hand there and see it's hot water. It's getting warm. So all the people come back, they look, there's no sun, they're looking at this solar system outside, they're running inside of the house, they're seeing the hot water, they stay long enough for it to go up 5 degrees, they're like, you're taking solar energy right out of the air in the middle of the night, you're going to be rich, man, you people are going to be rich. We're like, yeah, it's kind of neat, huh? How'd you like to be part of that? Yeah, well, how do I get to be part of that? And so now, there's only one thing worse than an ignorant man who is broke, and that is an ignorant man with money. And so we all of a sudden got money. So we hire an engineer. Now we can afford one. We hire an engineer. The engineer comes in, and we say to the engineer, we say, okay, here it is. He looks, he doesn't know whether to cry or laugh. He doesn't know. He's looking at this thing going, you people are crazy. Was there anybody that knew what he was doing on this deal? Nobody. No, sorry, just a bunch of salesmen. So tell us, how do we go from here? We want to mass produce these things. He's like, whoa, wait a minute. So the first thing that engineer did was tell us that we can't be doing what we were doing. And so we fire the engineer. And then we go out to hire another engineer, and we say to the guy, look, before you even see this thing, you're a young man, do you need the job? You do, good. Because we don't want you to tell us that we can't do it. We want you to tell us why we are doing it. Not that we can't. We know we can. We're making the hot water. Why are we doing it? And so we went to work on that. And actually it took about a year, 2 years, almost 3 years, with all kinds of fights in our little group. And I finally wound up buying everybody out of the deal because I was the only one that sold it. Everybody talked about what it could or couldn't do, and they were embarrassed because they'd go to the engineer, and they would say, engineer, we're doing things that we can't do. The engineer would say, you can't do that. They would say, we're sorry, and they'd go home. I went to the customer. I said, hello, here's what we're doing. We are doing it. Would you like to be able to do that? Good. Here's how much it costs. Let's put one in. So I didn't go to the engineers. I went to the customers, and me and the customers made a lot of money.
Emerging on the frontiers of science, a pioneering breed of theoretical physicists and inspired inventors are challenging the way we think about harnessing the unseen forces of nature. Despite ridicule, lack of funding, and outright suppression, They are confronting an outmoded classical worldview and ushering in a monumental scientific revolution.
Most people would agree you can't get something for nothing. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And yet, we get our oxygen free from the air we breathe. We get sunlight free, and water, that used to be free until bottled drinking water came along. But what about energy? We've always had to pay for that, whether it's wood or coal, oil or electricity. It's always been the rule that you can never get back more energy than what you put in the first place. That's a fundamental law of nature. Physicists of the 19th century figured that out with the first law of thermodynamics, the conservation of energy. Maybe so. But science has come a long way since then. And laws, well, there's never been one that hasn't been broken.
Hi, I want to welcome you guys to Better World Technology. We're going to have fun here today. I built the world's most efficient heat pump and developed it. And these are the evaporators for that heat pump right here. They're 8 feet high, 3 feet wide. And if you notice here, there's 8 of them. They go all the way across here. Now, you could have them in this type of an angle that looks a lot like a solar system, but you could also just slap them up against the side of a building, or you could put them up on top of a roof. They don't have to be facing the sun. They can be facing east, west, south, wherever you want to go. You also, a lot of people have built them into fences, and they've also built them into carports and things. But if you notice here, all this is a very thin little piece of metal. It's just about 1/4 of an inch thick, even with the little veins in it. And we have a vein pattern on top of it. The main thing is that this is aluminum, highly conductive, and so there's no thickness to it really. That's just a plate. This is the thickness right here. And so there's no real thickness to it, but the thing that we've done here is we have created the coldest thing outside. By creating the coldest thing outside, when we take refrigerant, just like the stuff you got in your refrigerator, and we run it inside this panel, you notice up here at the top when we come in the nipple, this is all hot water for them in the middle of the month. So we're like, wow, this will be great. And if it works fairly good, or as good as anything else does, we'll be happy. Surely we can make it work as good as everything else does. All these major corporations are in it. It must work. So that was the way the whole idea was born. Now, a couple of guys, sales guys, not a technical person in our midst, all of a sudden say, let's do it. Let's build this thing. So we went out, got somebody to design a panel like this, an evaporator, flat plate collector, and got a whole truckload of them. Bought a bunch of those. Now, we did not know how many of those things you're supposed to put for a house. We don't know. No idea. The refrigeration model that all engineers use is 1 ton of evaporator, 1 horsepower compressor, 1 ton of condenser. That means that if you can expand one full enough refrigerant that the heat from it would melt a block of ice, that's 1 ton in size in 1 hour, that's the volume that it was set up to evaporate. So 1 ton of evaporator, and then if you had a 1 horsepower compressor, it would keep up with that in an hour. And then if you had a 1 ton condenser, enough condenser to be able to once again cool down or condense the amount of the volume of gas it would take to heat up a block of ice 1 ton in size, then you've got a refrigeration paradigm. This is it. This is the Bible. All refrigeration engineers go by this. All the experts say 1, 1, 1. That's the formula. But we didn't read the book. We didn't know the formula. Oh well, we don't know what we're doing. We're just going to put an evaporator up there. We don't know how big to build it. We'll just fill the whole roof with them. And then at least they'll be big enough that they'll work, because if it's too little, we won't know if it's working or not. So bigger is better. So we go down to a refrigeration supply house, and we come in and we say, we need a condenser. The guy there says, okay, What kind of condenser do you need? What size do you need? What are your operating pressures? How much vapor do you have? What is the temperature of the vapor as it's coming into the compressor? And starts cussing at us, saying all these crazy things to us. And I said, look, man, we got cash, we can afford it. You don't have to cuss at us, we'll just buy it. He says, oh, okay, well, what size do you need? And we said, what's the biggest one you got? Bigger is better. And he says, oh, the biggest one I got, well, I got a 6-ton sitting out there. I said, oh, that won't work. We'd have to have a forklift truck to pick it up. He said, no. That's the amount of refrigerant that it'll condense. Two of you guys could pick it up easy and throw it on the back end of that Bronco. Super, we'll take it. So we bought a 6-ton condenser. Now we got a 6-ton condenser. God only knows how much evaporator we got on top of that roof there. And we got a 2-horsepower compressor. Any engineer would have told us you're crazy. And so basically, it's a divine kind of madness. We went out and put it in, hooked it all up. Now, we got to have refrigerant. We also needed a TX valve, but I'm not going to get into that. And so we got to have a refrigerant, okay? So we get the refrigerant for the compressor, and we get how much? We don't know. What's the biggest bottle you got? A 50-pound container. Fine, we'll take a 50-pound container. The lines are in a straight line down, but there's like a little pattern at the very top, so that as the pressure builds up in any one place, the Freon can migrate to the other parts of the panel. So it now has a chance of sending the Freon down in any one of these channel lines, and then wherever you get pressure, Freon could then jump ship and go over to another line, and so it pretty much concentrates it down through the middle of the panel in a nice even pressure, thereby getting the Freon to cover all the areas of this. Now, the refrigerant we put in here boils at 40 degrees below zero. Therefore, as long as the refrigerant that's inside this panel is colder than whatever the air is out here, or the phenomenon that's hitting this panel, then the heat from the air or the sun or the wind or the rain or the sleet or the snow will be transferred into the refrigerant on the other side, because it's the second law of thermodynamics. Hot goes to cold. So if this is the coldest thing outside, anything out there that touches it is going to give its heat to it. A little bit of heat goes a long way. That gas starts expanding like crazy, and as it expands, it then is drawn into the compressor, not through suction. I've got engineers and inventors that don't like to use the term suction, but through negative pressure. So as the compressor is creating this negative pressure, the gas is migrating to it. And so a compressor is a gas pump. It'll pump gas. And so the gas is being pumped by the compressor into the compressor, elevated in temperature. And even though if you touch this panel, it's ice cold to your hand, and if you touch the line going out of the panel, it's still ice cold to your hand. When it hits that compressor, compressor takes all the gas in this space, puts it in that space, elevates the pressure and the temperature. Going out of the compressor, do not touch that line whenever that thing is on, because it's 200 to 250 degrees hot. And so that's where we get the heat. All of the heat is transferred in here. We then use a compressor to take the relatively useless energy that we've got and elevate the temperature and pressure and make it very useful energy. Then that heat would be transferred later. One last point I want to make, and then we'll go inside, is that actually right here, when we were using R22 instead of R12, somebody suggested using that. We used to use it in the panels, but if the compressor wasn't calling for any heat, it wasn't migrating the Freon would sit out here, and if the sun came out or we got a big wind or anything, all of a sudden, man, the pressures built up out here. It was unbelievable, and the pressures got as high as 500 pounds per square inch. We were popping those nipples and popping the lines, and so we had to stop using R22 because when it wasn't on cycle, it was building up too much pressure. Now, one other thing I want to say is that the air over this surface area causes a convection to happen across the surface. If you've got a 2-mile-an-hour wind, you'll get more air molecules that dump their heat into this panel than you will in a 1-mile-an-hour wind. So the greater the wind is flowing, the more molecules that are going to be transferring their heat, and the heat transfer here happens instantaneously, faster than you can blink. So if a molecule hits there and it's hot, it all of a sudden will let go of its heat, and so if we can get it out of there and get a new one in there, that makes it even better. We'll hear more about that as we go up to the facility up here. Okay? All right, let's do it. I guess.